Hello students, this lecture is about the epidermis, the outermost layer of the skin. In the epidermis, and when we're talking about the skin in the epidermis, we're especially going to be talking about cells and cell types. This is going to be a common theme throughout the whole course. We're going to be talking, physiology and monophysiology is really about cellular and molecular biology. What is happening with the cells? And then with what is happening with those cells, how does that relate to the whole organ? In this case, some of the cells that I'm going to introduce are the keratinocytes, especially the keratinocytes and the melanocytes. The keratinocytes, they're the main skin cell type in your skin. They probably represent about 75–80% of your skin cells. And the key thing with keratinocytes, they produce a protein called keratin. And keratin is a protein that gives your skin its protective properties. And so one of the key functions of your skin is protection. The skin has a very strong protective function. And the cells that give your skin that protective function are the keratinocytes. And the protein that they produce that gives them that function, that protective function, is keratin. And so you're going to need to know what keratinocytes are and what their function is and what they produce. Another key cell type in the epidermis is melanocytes. They produce a pigment called melanin, and this is what gives your skin your color, and it also gives your skin protection against UV rays. So melanocytes are very important as well for the protective functions of skin. Then we have a couple other cell types. We won't really talk about these too much, but again, I want to introduce this idea that in order to study and understand physiology, you have to know what the cell's function is and how the cell works. We're especially going to see that when we get into the muscle tissue and muscle cells, in which we'll delve into the muscle cells in depth in order to be able to understand muscle contraction. But here in the skin, here are two more cell types. Here's what is called a dendritic cell, and this is an immune system cell. These are white blood cells. They're macrophages, except they're what are called wandering macrophages. They move out of the circulatory system, and they will have an immune system function. Again, that's part of the protective function of your skin. Your skin is what's called an innate system of immune defense. It protects you against all sorts of bacteria and viruses simply by protecting bacteria and viruses from getting into your body. And the macrophages in your skin help to do that. Then finally, here are tactile cells or mercile cells. And these are touch receptors that are found in your skin. And they're involved in the sensation of touch. Now, one of the key things about the epidermal layers, the epidermis, is your skin never wears down. You never wear through your skin down into the muscle and the bone. And that's because the skin is constantly regenerating itself. The skin cells are constantly growing and dividing, forming new cells, and so your skin will always be there for your lifetime. It never wears down. It never just goes away. And so what happens is there are several different layers to the epidermal cell, and we're going to go through those layers. But the basic understanding of it in the epidermis, and again, the epidermis is the outermost layer of the skin. In the outermost layer of the skin, the bottom layer of that epidermis, we have cells that are constantly growing and dividing and forming new skin cells. And then those new skin cells, they start to move and migrate to the very top, to the very surface of the epidermis. And as they move and migrate to the surface of the epidermis, they differentiate. And differentiate, you could say that's a science word for change. They change their form and their function. And what happens is as they move to the epidermal surface, they fill up with keratin, they lose their intracellular organelles, and eventually when they reach the very top part of the epidermis, the very outer layer of your skin, they are completely flattened out cells filled with keratin, and they're dead. And so your very outermost layer of skin cells are actually a layer of dead skin cells filled with keratin that provides a protective property. Let's take a closer look at this. Here are the four layers I talked about. Here's the epidermal layer. Remember, the epidermal layer is the outermost layer of the skin. Underneath that is going to be the dermal layer, the dermis, in which the accessory structures are located. But the epidermis, we have four layers. We have the stratum basal layer. And this is the bottommost layer. This is the layer of cells that are actively growing and dividing. We call that mitotic. They're undergoing mitosis. And they're stem cells. Stem cells are, in this case, we'll just think of them as constantly regenerating cells. Cells that are constantly growing and dividing and forming new cells. And in this case, they're forming new skin cells. Then here's the next layer, the stratum spinosum. And here the cells begin to flatten out a little bit. They begin to change shape. They begin to form what are called intermediate filaments. That's kind of filaments are like essentially considered like the skeleton of the cell. Then they work their way up to the stratum granulosum. At this point, the cells are losing much of their interior organelles. They're losing the cytoplasm. They're beginning to fill up with a kind of a pre-keratin structure called keratinohyaline. And then finally, here's the outermost layer, the stratum corneum. This is, at this time, the cells have been completely flattened out. They're filled with keratin, and they're actually dead. And they're forming a protective layer of the skin. Let's take one more look at that. Here's a diagrammatical layer. Here again, we start off at the stratum basal level. And it's the stratum basal level that the skin cells are constantly growing and dividing and forming new skin cells. And those skin cells start to get pushed up. They start to move up towards the surface of the skin. The next layer is the stratum spinosa. And here you can start to see the change in shape and this change in form of those cells as they begin to fill up with pre-keratin. The next layer, the stratum granulosum. At this point, the organelles have essentially deteriorated. The cells are flattened out. They're again filled up with this pre-keratin substance. And then finally, those cells get pushed up to the outermost layer, the stratum corneum, where at that point, the cells are completely filled with keratin. They're dead, and they're forming the protective layer of your skin. Thank you.